I dragged my suitcase through another airport, noticing the tacky holiday decorations identical to those at the other airports I'd visited this month. Someone thought blasting Christmas songs over the loudspeakers was a great idea. Hearing Taylor Swift whine about her Christmas wishes just depressed me more. One of the wheels on my suitcase was stuck, making me drag it instead of rolling it. I checked in at the counter and found that my flight was on time. That was the best news I'd heard all month, showing just how awful my life had become. This wasn't how my life was supposed to go. I'm 39, stuck in a dead-end job, newly divorced, and on the edge of depression. I haven't been on a date in 4 months unless you count those nights last week when I fell asleep in front of the TV with my dog. I really think that should count because he's a male dog, and he acts just like a man too. As soon as we were done eating, he tried to cop a feel. I was half awake when I noticed that the dog got a really intense look on his face and started rubbing my left leg. Okay, I dropped some chicken from my sandwich on it, but he was still trying to feel me up. According to my life plan, I should be working on my second perfect child by now, instead of slogging my way through another airport. The holidays are the worst time to fly. I guess it's seeing all those happy, smiling faces, all those people heading off to be with their families, while I'm just trying to put food on the table and keep the bills paid. As I sit down in the lounge to wait to be called aboard my plane, I look around the boarding area. The decor looks like the decor in 100 other similar areas. I've been doing this for so long that all airports and hotels look the same to me. I spot him out of the corner of my eye as I reach for my purse to get my phone. A guy a few years younger than I am smiles as he approaches me. He's probably about 35. I wish I had grabbed my compact instead of the phone so I could make sure my makeup wasn't smudged, but Hez the one smiling at me. If he didn't like what he saw, he wouldn't be grinning. Well, maybe he would if he was trying to sell me something. I sit up straight and look at him as he approaches. He isn't bad looking, his hair is light brown. I prefer dark hair on men, but I can't afford to be choosy. Until he lit up when he looked at me, I began to think that I was too far over the hill. He slows down a bit as he gets closer to me, so I smile. I don't give him my full 1,000-watt smile because I don't want him to think I'm desperate or a professional. I just give him the friendly version. "Hi," I say cheerfully as he gets within speaking range. He looks at me strangely and walks right by me. As my shock wears off, I notice that his smile and the way his face lit up weren't for me at all. "Did you miss me?" he asks the woman standing just behind me. She replies cheerfully. "Who was that woman who spoke to you?" she asks. "The hell if I know," he shrugs. "Just some weird old airport woman, I guess. Let's go home so I can show you how much I missed you." "I can't wait," she gushes. "We might not make it all the way home." As the happy couple saunters away from me, I can't help but grit my teeth. I hate that witch. Then I realize that it was just my jealousy coming to the forefront of my consciousness. She was basking in and enjoying the fact that she had a man who loved her. He loved her so much that being away from her made him long to be with her again. They'd go home and try to screw each other's brains out, but there would be more to it than that. Their union would be one of joy and sharing. They would literally open themselves to each other and share their souls. It would be so much more than just two healthy beings slapping against each other until they released fluids. That kind of thing was very special. So maybe I was jealous of the witch, but I didn't really hate her. In fact, I used to be her, and that's the problem. I knew intimately what she had, and I'd give anything to get that back. The thing that almost made me cross that border into hating her was the fact that, unlike me, she was smart enough to know what she had and treasure it. After they left, I looked around at the other passengers in the boarding area. A couple of them looked at me sheepishly. They probably saw my embarrassing little drama as it unfolded. Well, I was really glad that my embarrassment and my very human mistake could bring some happiness or some entertainment to their lives. Other than seeing me embarrass myself, I was sure that none of them would have given me a second look. I guessed that I was nearing the age when women develop their special powers. Apparently, mine were kicking in early. Women over 40, unless they're extremely beautiful, well-built, or rich, all get the power of invisibility. The only ones immune to our powers are our families. Everyone else can look right at us and simply not see us. Once we get that old, young men don't consider us sex objects, and since they think about sex most of the time, we don't exist. Young women don't want to be like us, so we don't exist in their world either. Men our age all want younger women, and we don't want men who are too much older than us. The funny thing is that if given the choice, the men who were older than us would mostly pick younger women too, if they could get them. The boarding area fills up quickly as the time for the flight to depart gets closer. I pull my briefcase and purse closer to me as the seating area becomes more congested. I wonder about my family for perhaps the fourth time this month. What happened to us? After my parents died, we seemed to lose track of each other. I have a brother and a sister out there somewhere. I don't know their phone numbers or even where they live. Okay, that isn't totally true. My sister lives somewhere in the South, and my brother lives in prison. I'm not sure which one, though. I do know that he'll be there for a long time. He got caught doing something with drugs. He was supposed to be the smart one, too. I also have a vague memory of some aunts and I think an uncle that are still alive, but I wouldn't even begin to know where to look. I guess what got me to thinking about all of this was that hokey movie that I woke up and watched one night last week when my dog was taking a break from fondling my chicken-smeared legs. It was one of those movies where the spirit of Christmas gives this guy who had almost died trying to save some old lady a wish. I'm telling you, it was hokey. I know that most of you are thinking that the guy asked for $1 gazillion, right? Not $1 million, not $1 billion, $1 gazillion, right? Enough money to buy your own country and buy enough people to live in your country too. But nope, the guy only wanted one thing. Stop me if you've seen this movie. All he wanted was to have a nice Christmas with his family one more time. Like me, his family was scattered all over everywhere. They had their own lives and careers and kids and all of that real-life normal. Over the years, they drifted apart and became strangers. They only got together when someone died, and then only for the funeral and to decide who got what of the dead relative. I guess in my own way, I've been wondering whether or not things like that really ever happen, and if they do they ever happen for people like me? Because you see, more than anything else in the world, I wish that I had my own Christmas wish like that idiot in the movie. And no, I wouldn't waste mine on money either. Don't get me wrong, I don't want world peace. The world's economy is already bad enough. We could use a good war about now to crank things back up. And if you're thinking, I want to get my family back together again, you're out of your mind. That gang of losers and freeloaders should really stay away from me if they know what's good for them. I can only think of one thing I'd wish for, and strangely enough, I threw it away stupidly myself. Stupid teenage girls who don't look where they're going could all be killed. The little witch is as big as I am, and she just tramped all over my foot and kept walking. Holy, she's bigger than I am. Was my bum that big when I was her age? And the little witch didn't have the manners to even apologize. She just walked right by, showing her friend a poster of some little girl she bought at the gift shop. Who the hell is Justin Timberlake? Oh, it's Justin Bieber and has a guy. I remember him now. We had another version of him about 3 or 4 years ago. Yep, only then his name was Jesse McCartney. At least Jesse had a hit. What was the name of that song? Oh yeah, it was called How Do You Sleep? I played that song over and over again a while ago. It helped to take the edge off of my problem, but now it really has been a year. Anyway, back to my one wish. If I had one wish, I'd wish for one chance to get back with my ex. Just like the words in that song, it's been about a year now. Ain't seen or heard from you. I've been missing you crazy. How do you sleep? I wondered all kinds of things about Tom. I wondered if he ever thought about me. I wondered if he missed me. I wondered if he had any regrets about the way he just threw our marriage away. If he had it to do all over again, would he have given me a second chance? Statistics say that most people are miserable after a divorce. I know that I am. But they say that even the people who wanted the divorces are unhappy. 8 out of 10 of the people who go through a divorce say that if they had to do it again, they'd work harder to save their marriages. I wondered if Tom felt like that. More than anything else, I miss him at night and in the morning when I first wake up. I'm not just talking about sex, Although the sex with Tom was amazing, more than anything else, I miss having that man lay down and wrap his arms around me and hold me through the night. Nothing else mattered when I was in his arms. The bills didn't matter, the job didn't matter, nothing did. Even on days when he went out for a run and just fell into bed still sweaty, I craved that man's touch. And I know he loved me. He was a really good-looking guy and smart as hell. But for some reason, he loved me. And like in the song, it has been almost exactly a year since I've seen him. He didn't even come to court. I never had a chance to explain or apologize or even talk to him. I can still see the look on his face. That last look haunts me to this day. I looked up as the woman behind the counter's loudspeaker distorted voice announced boarding for my flight. Like all the other robots, I shuffled listlessly into the line forming in front of the door. Despite what you see on TV or hear on the radio, chivalry is dead. Several young men leaped in front of me to get a better position in line. Okay, I know I'm not Angelina Jolie, but is it really that manly to push your way past a woman struggling with a heavy briefcase and a purse? And if you do manage to get in line ahead of her, what do you get? The plane won't take off until all of the passengers have boarded. If you're traveling coach or economy, you won't get upgraded because you got on the plane first. They should have a special award for douchebags like that. Let's call it the DB Trophy. It can be the Heisman Trophy for douchebags, dickheads, and a-holes worldwide. I can see it now. We'll have a ceremony on ESPN or Fox. The announcer will say, "And for knocking down a 39-year-old woman dragging her luggage through an airport boarding line, the award goes to insert name here." Maybe I was just cranky at the thought of spending another holiday season alone. I really shouldn't let things like this bother me. It never used to when I was married. All I thought about back then was getting back home to Tom. Of course, I traveled a lot less then, too. I only went on the road if it was absolutely necessary. Now that I'm divorced, I have no reason to stay home and be depressed, so I travel more. Then again, maybe since I'm traveling so much, I get more exposure to the douchebags. As I settled into my place in line, I saw one of those exceptions, one of those guys who give us hope. There was a guy up about 8 places in line ahead of me who'd gotten there because he was standing near the door when it opened. He pulled a woman who was even older than me into line ahead of him. When the young douchebag behind him started to make a fuss about it, the guy turned and glared at him. The young douchebag was so shocked that he just shut up. I think that I was more shocked than the douchebag was. I felt the weirdest tingling going from my feet all the way up the back of my neck. The man who'd stood up to the douchebags was a medium-sized guy. He wasn't big by any stretch of the imagination, but not small either. He had brown hair that seemed to have a nice shine to it. His eyes were soft and brown as well. This couldn't be considered love at first sight since it wasn't the first time I'd seen him. I'd seen him hundreds, make that thousands of times, both physically and in my dreams. It appeared for some strange reason that the spirit of Christmas had heard my whining and responded. My Christmas wish was coming true. The man who stood up to the douchebag was my ex-husband, Tom. It was surreal, standing only a few feet away from him. On one hand, I wanted to rush over to him and hug the living daylights out of him. I wanted to tell him that our year apart was over and we could get back together again and both of our lives would be better. I wanted to tell him that I understood what I'd done and I'd learned from it. Not only had I learned from it, but I'd suffered from it, and I'd do anything I had to do to make sure that it never happened again. On the other hand, I needed to be smarter than that. I had to look at this logically. I needed to assess the situation and not just go in half-cocked. There was bound to be some anger or resentment on his part. He might not be ready to see or speak to me yet. Looking at him, I could see that he wasn't the same old Tom, but I wasn't the same old Lisa. He was thinner. I'm not sure that was a good thing. He wasn't overweight to begin with. I guess we both handled the depression in different ways. I spent a lot of my time lying around eating chocolate, so maybe I'd gained 2 or 14 pounds. And maybe my bum had spread a bit and my gut isn't quite as tight as it used to be. It was never that tight to begin with. but I hadn't gone so far that a few weeks of dieting and getting more exercise couldn't reverse the damage. Tom's depression probably had him skipping meals because he was just too tired or just didn't feel like cooking. But it wasn't just that he was thinner. He seemed to have a different mindset as well. He used to be so focused and so energetic, but now he seemed to be more in control of both himself and his surroundings. He seemed to have matured. At the same time, he lost something. Maybe it was his innocence. I guess that I was probably to blame for that. He trusted me and loved me completely, and I'd simply been unworthy of that trust. My heart was beating like a drum. Just being this close to him again had my mind running through all types of possibilities. It had to be the spirit of Christmas. It had been just over a year, and I hadn't seen or even heard about him from anyone. And now, out of nowhere, he pops up. It was a sign. I was sure of it. I needed to be really careful about the way I approached him, though. My track record was impeccable. I seemingly screwed up everything I touched. My life and my marriage were proof of that. I knew, Christmas wish or not, I'd only have one shot at this. As the line started moving and we boarded the plane, luck seemed to be on my side. The flight attendants seemed to be seating everyone according to their tickets. Tom was in business class like I was, and luckily for me, the douchebag and his friends as well as the old lady were all in economy. Tom seemed to also be traveling alone, which gave me another edge. More than likely, no one would sit down next to him until all of the available seats had been filled by at least one person. Then the seats by the more attractive people would fill in. The seats next to people who were fat, ugly, smelly, or just weird would be the last ones taken. Judging by my place in line when I got on, there should still be empty seats. I'd forego an empty seat to sit next to Tom. As I got on the plane, I noticed the two female flight attendants looking at Tom and then at each other and nodding. As I started down the aisle, just as I got ready to dive into the seat next to Tom, the 350 pounds, behemoth 3 passengers ahead of me sat down next to Tom. I was crushed. I didn't know what to do. I sat down across the aisle from the budding Buddha and stewed. I was pissed beyond belief. Why the hell would this fat-a-hole want to destroy my Christmas wish by sitting down next to my husband? Was this guy gay or something? I couldn't believe that the spirit of Christmas had set me up like that just to dash my hopes. Somewhere up in the clouds, the spirit of Christmas was probably laughing it off at me. Then things got even worse. A young woman walked down the aisle. Even I noticed her as she got on the plane. She had long blonde hair, big giant eyes, and the big everything else big obviously fake boobs, a small high-pitched voice, and a habit of laughing at things that weren't remotely funny if the person who said them was male. Even the flight attendant gasped when the witch got on the plane. As she walked down the aisle, I noticed that the giant next to Tom had his tongue out, and he was drooling. I smiled at him. He looked embarrassed that he'd been caught perving on her. "I'm surprised that you're not following her," I said. He just shrugged his shoulders and looked at me sheepishly. "Seriously," I said. "Her name is Tina, and she likes big teddy bear-type guys." His neck jerked around in her direction so fast I thought his head was about to pop off. I've never seen a guy that big move that fast. If the players on the Lions' defensive line could move that quickly, no quarterback in the NFL would be safe. He ran his fat bum to the back of the plane and plopped down in the seat next to Barbie so quickly it looked like he was jet-propelled. I don't think his feet touched the floor more than twice in that whole distance. Boy, would he be pissed when he found out that I didn't know anything about that bimbo. I quietly settled into the seat next to my ex-husband. He had his head tilted back and his eyes closed. I don't think he'd recognize me yet. Either that or he just hadn't seen me. I was sure that over the course of a 3-hour flight, we'd have a chance to talk. All of the seats around us filled in, and I found myself smiling. Not only did I smile because my Christmas wish was on track, but I smiled because with all of the seats filled, he couldn't escape. He looked up as the flight attendants gave their usual safety procedure lecture and went over the way we were expected to conduct ourselves while on the plane. Finally, they locked the door, and the plane began to taxi forward. Tom released a big breath of air. "Do I need to hold your hand?" I asked. Are you still nervous about takeoffs and landings? His head turned towards me and our eyes met. In that fraction of a second, I saw him go through recognition, anger, and finally resignation. "I'm fine," he said. Then he pulled out a magazine and busied himself reading it. It had been a big step. He now knew that I was there and sitting right next to him. He hadn't cursed at me or tried to get one of the flight attendants to change seats. The giant silver beer can with wings that we were sitting on gained speed and gradually lifted its bulk into the air. Even after all of the flights I've been on, I'm still astonished that something that big can propel itself through the air. The instance where we stop rolling and start flying is one of the most amazing things in the world to me. This plane, like all the others I've been on, made the transition as effortlessly as possible. We gained altitude and then executed a long, sweeping bank to align ourselves in the direction of our course. The captain said a few words over the intercom that I was simply not paying attention to. The flight attendants walked up and down the aisles, greeting everyone and answering questions. We hadn't been in the air for a full 2 minutes yet, and those flight attendants were already annoying me. It took every bit of my self-control not to scream at them for being so goddamn cheerful. Tom, on the other hand, found his magazine mesmerizing. In fact, he hadn't looked up from it even once. "Can we talk?" I said out of the blue. His brown eyes looked up from his magazine at me. They scanned my face as if looking for something. Whatever he wanted to see there, I hoped to God that he'd find it. "What would be the point?" he asked. His voice was masked by neutrality. I had no idea how he felt about talking to me. He could have been seething with anger, wincing in pain, or simply totally disinterested. I just couldn't tell. "Tom, we never got a chance to talk afterwards. I never got the chance to apologize or explain. I didn't get a chance to say anything to you. We never got any form of closure. My shrink says that after a traumatic experience, both parties are in a kind of limbo until they get a chance to come face to face and express their feelings or their viewpoints on the incident to the other concerned party." He looked at me as if he didn't understand what I was saying. His look had no anger in it, only curiosity. He wasn't trying to hurt me. It was as if he simply couldn't comprehend why I'd want to talk to him or why he'd be interested in listening. "Interesting," he said. Then he turned back to his magazine. Tom always did have a way of frustrating me. In this case, he wasn't holding a conversation with me. I'd imagined this moment thousands of times over the last year. There were so many things that I wanted to say to him. I practiced answering any and all questions that I was sure he'd ask. I had responses to all of them, and I even had answers to his responses to my questions. As usual, Tom wasn't doing what I'd expected. He not only wasn't having a conversation with me, he wasn't refusing to speak to me either. I'd been ready for him to refuse to speak to me. I had a whole speech or 3 prepared for handling that. 2 of them included starting out with things that were outright lies just to draw him into the conversations. But Tom, with his refusing to speak, yet not actually speaking, avoided them all. He was so different from everyone I'd ever met. He was smart, he was sexy, and he danced to the beat of a drummer that seemingly only he could hear. At the same time, if he liked you, he had no problems drawing you into his world and allowing you to hear that drummer and jiggle just a little bit to his unusual rhythm right along with him. Hell, I missed that drummer. When we first got together, both of us were out of college and deep into our 20s. We both started our careers and were both between relationships. I met him through a friend of a friend. She liked him too, but he had simply never noticed her. Guys always talk about how much they hate being locked in the friend zone. I think that we women don't know it, but sometimes guys make a move on us that is totally inappropriate on purpose. They do this because they want to break out of the friend zone. The friend zone is hell to a guy. It means that he can do everything in the world for us, but we're still never going to screw him. We treat the guys in the friend zone like they're girlfriends who just happen to have tools swinging between their legs. We can meet and totally hate other guys. We can think those guys are total a-holes, but those a-holes are still more likely to screw us than the guys in the friend zone are. So sometimes those friend zone guys will grab your bum or your tits, knowing that they're destroying the friendship with us just to get out of the friend zone. To them, it's better to be an a-hole that may someday get laid than to be stuck having to listen to the details of every bad day a woman has been on without the slightest chance of ever screwing her. Anyway, Cindy was in Tom's friend zone. She would stop over to watch football with him even though she didn't know a thing about it. While she was in his apartment, she'd accidentally spill beer all over herself and have to change into something of his. She told me once she wore one of his T-shirts with nothing on under it for a whole game, and he simply didn't make a move. It was very demoralizing for her. She knew he wasn't gay, and yet there she was, sitting only inches away from him, but Tom didn't notice. Things like that are hard on a girl's ego, so she decided to fight fire with fire. She pretended that she wasn't interested in him either. She even went as far as to suggest other women that he might be interested in. She wasn't stupid enough to suggest anyone who was more attractive than she was, or anyone she thought he might like better, which was where I came in. She brought me over to a party she was hosting and introduced me to him. It was a screwed-up situation because I really wanted to help her out. But the problem was the first time I laid eyes on him, I wanted him. At that time, I was 29 years old and working as a secretary. I dated frequently but hadn't found anyone really serious. I wasn't a prude, but I insisted that my dates had to take the time to get to know me before we got physical. After we talked and I heard Tom's side of the story, I realized that he was even worse than I was. He simply didn't sleep with women that he didn't really sense a connection with. If he couldn't imagine himself married to you, he simply wouldn't sleep with you. Apparently, we both passed each other's standards because less than 2 hours after we met, Tom's tool was in me as far as he could get it. My legs were so far apart trying to pull him in even further that I expected my hips to pop out of their sockets at any second. It felt so good that I just didn't care. I lost Cindy as a friend, of course, but it was all her own fault anyway. In a way, Cindy had insulted me. She'd only introduced me to Tom because she thought that she was prettier than I was. She also thought that she was built better than I was, and she thought that I had no chance with him. It was her loss and her fault. I still laugh sometimes thinking about how she must have felt after introducing us at that party only to see the two of us leave shortly thereafter. She must have felt really bad to leave her guests just so she could follow us back to my apartment. She waited outside for over 4 hours until he left so she could run up to my apartment and confront me. I opened the door thinking that he'd forgotten something. I hadn't even bothered to put any clothes on. I still had bite marks all over my neck. She took one look at me and burst into tears before calling me every kind of slut she could imagine. "You're not as pretty as I am," she cried. I just nodded my head. "Your tits are too small and your butt is way too big," she screamed. I nodded my head again. "You're a slut! You screwed him on the first date! You didn't actually even go on a date!" she yelled. Again, all I could do was nod my head in agreement with her. "What do you have that I don't?" she cried. "Well, for starters," I said, "his mine, and I have no intention of giving him back to you." I slammed the door in her face and ended 5 years of friendship. But it was also the start of my relationship and eventual marriage to Tom. He was and still is the love of my life. In those first few weeks with Tom, I quickly learned what love really was. We spent almost every possible second together. We spent a lot of that time in bed, but we also spent time getting to know each other's likes, dislikes, and personality quirks as well. There were a lot of days when we'd go to bed with each other and not have sex. We'd simply lay there touching each other. After we got married, it got even more intense. Tom became consumed with making our lives together the best they could be. He bent over backwards trying to make and keep me happy. We saved every penny we could to buy our house. The plan was that we'd start preparing for our eventual genetically perfect nuclear children. I noticed after a while that for Tom, while we didn't have very much money coming in from our jobs above what we needed and the little bit that we could save every week, there was a double standard. Tom denied himself even the most inconsequential things, but he'd always splurge on anything I wanted. I didn't realize what he was doing until the summer that he didn't even drive his Camaro once. That way, he told me, He could save the entire cost of the car's ridiculously high insurance rates. He could also save on the increased spending on gas for its powerful motor. I walked away from him shaking my head when I realized that only the week before, he'd taken me out to dinner at a very expensive restaurant that I wanted to try, and he bought me 3 new outfits that I had to admit I didn't really need. It started to sink in that this man loved me. He hadn't married me simply because he liked screwing me. He really wanted me to be with him for the rest of his life. He was going to be more to me than the daddy figure to my kids. Tom was the missing piece of my soul. I applied for and got a position at work in the sales trainee program. After 6 months, I was a full-fledged salesperson. I hadn't fought for accounts and everything, but I did notice that my sales weren't nearly as high as some of the guys. I thought it was long-term relationships with their customers or other factors like that. I listened to some of the older salesmen. Sometimes I noticed that they all had ways of sweetening their deals. Some of them invited their customers to parties or barbecues. Others played golf or invited their customers to go gambling. But all of those guys got the best accounts, the highest sales numbers, and the best bonuses. I guess it was about 3 years ago. I'd been a salesperson for about 2 years. One of my best customers was Jack Harrison. Jack had been one of my first accounts, but he still only gave me small sales. He sometimes called some of the other salespeople for his bigger sales, even though technically he was my account. Jack was 70 years old and his health was bad. His wife had died a couple of years before that, and I'd gone to her funeral. I thought that we had the kind of relationship where I could ask him anything, so I did. I asked him why he gave me all of his regular day-to-day small-order business but deferred his big machinery sales to John McVeigh or even Lindsey Benson. He told me that those guys had a way of sweetening the deals for him. It turned out that those guys were getting the randy old sex workers. I was desperate for a bonus so I could stay in the sales force. I really needed to do my part to help Tom save for our house. So I slept with Jack. I really didn't consider it sex. He was 70 years old. Even with Viagra, he could only keep it up for about 10 minutes. There was also the fact that no man alive could compete with Tom when it came to sex. We were just so perfectly matched. We fit so well together, and I loved him so much. You simply couldn't compare him to anything else. After a couple of bonuses, the extra income really helped us. After a while, we bought our house and actually seemed to be doing well. Tom had gotten a couple of promotions at work and was now bringing in a lot more money. We traded in his Camaro for a newer and better Camaro. I got a new car as well. We still saved money, but it was more like a rainy day fund. Finally, we began to talk about me giving up my job so we could start having kids. We figured that I'd finish out the year and then give my notice early on in the next year. I was in Los Angeles having dinner with one of my biggest customers. I wanted to go out on a high note. I wanted to win the highest sales award for that quarter. I'd come close several times before, but neither I nor any female salesperson in the company had ever won it. After dinner, I retired to my room in the hotel with the customer. I was lying there imagining that the 65-year-old guy humping away at me was Tom and we were making a baby. "Come on, baby, give me the juice. Make me a mommy," I said. The old creep on me was out of breath and really didn't give a what I said as long as he got some. I could have called him Tom and he wouldn't have blinked. That was the way I got through the sex. I just closed my eyes and imagined it was Tom. Of course, it never felt as good as it did with Tom, but your mind can work wonders. Only that last time, something told me to open my eyes. I did, and my world ended. As my eyes focused, I noticed Tom standing there in the open doorway with several of my colleagues and my boss. He had tears running down his cheeks. I tried to push Harry off of me. He was partially deaf and didn't realize what was going on. "No," I screamed. "Goodbye, Lisa," said Tom. "I loved you." Even as he turned and walked away, I was pulling myself out from under Harry's bulk. The reactions of the men still in the room as I tried to dress and follow Tom were all markedly different. My boss was livid. He stood there, turning redder and redder like an old steam furnace. He was going over the facts in his mind almost as if he was collecting steam before he blew. The tittering expressions on the faces of my colleagues were also varying. I heard everything from, "I knew there was a reason my body was outselling me," to, "Hey, we all have our ways of closing a deal." Just before I left the room for the bathroom, I heard, "I should have been screwing her myself." Harry was smiling and high-fiving the guys. His newfound studliness by far outweighed any possible damage to his marriage. As I finished cleaning myself up and threw my clothes into a suitcase, I noticed that all of the guys, with the exception of my boss Derek, had gone. The pain and despair I'd felt finally also worked their way out of me. It came out in the form of long, mournful wails and sobs. I couldn't stop crying no matter what I did. Derek was trying to explain to me how they'd come to be there. There hadn't been any kind of surveillance on me. There hadn't been an investigation. Derek had discovered that I'd already won the top salesperson award for the quarter. He called me to tell me, and had forgotten that I was on the road. When he told Tom about the award, Tom had confessed that it would probably be my last trip since we were going to start our family. Both Derek and Tom thought that surprising me with a cake and a little ceremony would be a great idea, only they were the ones who ended up surprised. He told me that I should probably give Tom some time to get over his shock before I started trying to talk to him. Derek had been married and divorced 3 times. Wife number 4 seemed like she'd be the one to stick. He'd been through and seen it all. He'd even been through this once. He tried to explain to me what Tom was feeling or something like it, since every person was different. He told me that tomorrow would be soon enough to try to talk to Tom. He told me to get my story straight and be prepared to be humiliated and to take a lot of flack. He told me that it would probably take some time, but that Tom and I loved each other, so he thought that if we fought hard, we could make it. He also told me that I was fired. As soon as I was done packing, I checked out and headed for the airport. My flight wasn't scheduled to leave until the next afternoon. I'd missed the last flight out that day by less than a half hour. Unfortunately, Tom had been on it. When I got back to the hotel, Harry was sitting and drinking with the guys. I didn't go over to them. I stayed in my room crying and trying to call Tom. He never answered or returned any of my calls. My staying away from the guys didn't stop them from trying to come up to my room, though. I was no longer a colleague in their eyes. I was merely a slut. There were no longer any rules of workplace conduct to prevent them from hitting on me. When I flew out the next day, I'd spent the entire night preparing for my confrontation with Tom. I was prepared to get down on one knee and kiss his bum or whatever else he wanted me to do. I expected him to have changed the locks and the garage codes. I tried to get into the garage first. My remote worked on the first try. I knew then that, as angry as he probably was, it wasn't a deal-breaker if he still allowed me access to the garage where his precious Camaro was stored for the winter. As the garage door opened, my despair deepened. Tom's Camaro was not only gone in the middle of winter with snow on the ground, which was unheard of, but my car was in the garage. A lot of you won't understand what that means. Tom's car had not only never seen snow, it had never seen rain. Tom only drove that car in the summer on absolutely dry days. The underside of that car and all the rest of it was still showroom new. The car had never been washed in a car wash. He lovingly washed the car every 3rd day all summer, no matter what. It slept all winter in a heated garage, and he still washed it to keep dust off of it even though it was covered. There was only one meaning for this message he'd left me. Tom was gone, and he wasn't coming back. I fell down crying in the garage all over again. As I sat there crying, a UPS truck pulled up in front of the house. The driver got down and gave me a big package. It wasn't very heavy. I signed for the package, and the driver gave me a cheerful Merry Christmas and left. I knew what was in the box. It was one of Tom's Christmas presents. I bought him a suede and leather jacket with Camaro emblems all over it so he could remember the stupid car even when he couldn't drive it. I noticed a lot of junk piled up in front of the house. I overlooked it as I went to the door and tried my key. It still worked. Of course, I didn't know what to expect when I walked into the house. I guess I thought that maybe Tom would have gone crazy and damaged a lot of our belongings and messed up the house. I knew that things could be replaced, so I was prepared. But Tom had changed the house in a way that I never expected. There wasn't a single thing out of place. Unlike the usual situation when I traveled, this time the house was as neat as a pin. As I walked through room after room, I noticed that he hadn't taken anything, or at least not much. All of his clothes were gone and most of his tools. He'd taken every picture of himself, and all of the ones of the two of us he'd simply cut himself out of and replaced them in the frames. If I'd expected to burn off some nervous energy cleaning while I waited for him to contact me, I was disappointed because there was nothing for me to do. It took me a while to figure out what Tom had done. He literally destroyed our home without attempting to do any damage at all. He turned our home into just another house by simply taking all of the love out of it. As I looked around that house, instead of seeing all of the wonderful memories we built there and all of the hopes and dreams we still had of things we wanted to do there, I now saw only a big, empty box to keep all of my stuff in. Finally, after what seemed like forever squared, the phone rang. It was Mary, our next-door neighbor. She said she'd seen lights in the house and figured that I was home. I'd known Mary for years. We met her and her husband on the day we moved in. I figured I'd let her know that Tom had left me. Maybe she'd come over to make me some coffee and console me. She'd actually called to uninvite me to the party they were having this Saturday for Christmas Eve. She called me a few choice names and told me that I deserved whatever happened to me. Obviously, she'd spoken to Tom. Surprisingly, he'd asked her to look out for me and told her that I'd need a friend. I fell asleep on the couch after drinking far too much liquor. I woke up the next morning with a hell of a hangover. I hadn't seen or heard from Tom in over 36 hours, and I was going crazy. I wondered why he hadn't called to curse at me and call me names. Didn't he want to yell at me or at least ask me why? Later that evening, the doorbell rang. I leaped up from the couch and ran to the door. As I opened it, I noticed that there was a bored-looking girl there on the porch. She was chewing gum, and she looked at a list. She read my name off of the list. When I confirmed my identity, the little witch said, "Merry Christmas, you've been served." She handed me a thick folder of papers and smirked at me. Then she walked away, still popping her gum without a care in the world. I opened the folder. Never in my wildest dreams would I have expected it, especially not so fast. They were divorce papers. Tom was asking for a no-fault divorce. He wanted to split everything down the middle, $5,050. He'd already taken half of our checking and savings. He was liquefying our investments and would send me a check soon. He'd also removed himself from my 401k plan and sent me the papers so he could remove me from his. He generously filed a quitclaim to our house and was giving it to me. He kept his car and his truck. I kept my car. If I signed off on it, the divorce would be final in 60 days. There was no way in hell I'd give him up. I intended to get a lawyer and demand my day in court. I wanted to fight for my marriage with every breath I had left. I wouldn't let Tom get out of my life without me having tried my goddamnest to keep him. It took 75 days in the end instead of 60. You're expecting to hear that I fought for and got a meeting with him or counseling, right? None of that happened. Even my lawyer admitted that Tom had been way beyond fair. By rights, he should have made me sell the house and split the proceeds with him. I think in a way giving me the house was Tom's way of making me suffer even more by forcing me to remember all of the plans we'd made for our lives. I sat there alone in that house, and it was torture. Everything I saw reminded me of what I'd lost. Tom is also one of those people whose absence is felt by everyone he knew, so my neighbors wasted very little time in letting me know how they felt. Less than a week after Tom had gone, I started to feel like I was a tiny island in the middle of a huge lake. I was totally isolated among people who I once thought were my friends. There was also the fact that I couldn't really swing our mortgage without him, and I'd have taken a bath trying to refinance it, so I ended up selling it anyway, and for a lot less than it was worth. I got another job and started trying to work my way back up the food chain. The problem is that it's really hard to find motivation when you just don't give a damn. The new job was also in sales. For the first few months, I really didn't try very hard, so I made hardly any money, and I noticed that I was going through my savings at an alarming rate. The cost of my therapy sessions was also killing my bottom line. My new job had no provision for employee opinions, so I really needed to stop bleeding money from my savings account. The therapy was no help. I already knew where I'd gone wrong. I already knew what I'd lost. I'd actually lost a piece of myself. I'd given up a piece of my soul, and only by getting it back would I ever be whole again. So now it's a year later. I'm fatter, less attractive, and more depressed. I made a wish, and it appears to be coming true, but I guess I'm going to have to work for it a little bit. I don't mind, though, because all I wished for was a chance. Tom is sitting next to me. He's like a life preserver in the middle of a very rough sea, and I'm a drowning woman. There's no way I'm going to let him get away again. While we've been apart, I've done everything I possibly could to keep tabs on Tom. I started friendships and re-established relationships with people just to get information on how he was doing. Some of it required me to belittle myself and eat a lot of crow. Remember that witch, Cindy? She was the stupid one who gave me Tom in the first place, and we lost our friendship. She's also the one I turned to for help. She tried to screw Tom again just so she could hurt me. She took every opportunity to rub it in my face that she was still Tom's friend, and I wasn't. I was actually hurt when I learned that after our divorce, he'd taken her to dinner several times. Of course, he'd also gone out with several other women. I think Tom's anger and his feelings about me showed through there, though. He dated a few women, but never more than twice, and he never brought anyone home. I found out that he'd also been to a couple of holiday parties and one summer barbecue that Cindy had thrown. The barbecue was the hardest for me to take because at that point I was losing my house, and Tom was outside playing volleyball with Cindy and about 15 other people. Cindy, of course, knew that I was probably going to lose my house and did her best to make sure I got pictures of Tom living it up while I was suffering. Apparently, Tom had never done more than take Cindy to dinner and drop her off. There had been no rekindling of their romance. Cindy was still single and still friend-zoned. And all of my surveillance told me that Tom still loved me. His dating habits proved it, and his Spartan apartment screamed it. He simply hadn't let go. He had dated but never stayed with anyone. He had never brought anyone to his apartment. Even Cindy had only seen the inside of it twice, and those were only glimpses. He had changed a lot over the course of the year, though. The Tom that I knew was very focused on his career and his car. I found out that after our divorce, he worked for a couple of months in his same job, but then he walked away from it. He ended up going into business for himself. He sold the car, and the money that should have gone into saving it was poured into his business. The business was doing very well from what I'd been told. He was happier than ever, but he was still alone. And now, sitting next to him, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't too late to make things right. We could still have our future together, the one we had planned, and I would fight for it with every ounce of my being. Thanks for watching this intense story of betrayal and the hope for redemption. Do you think Lisa and Tom will ever truly reconcile? Or is their relationship beyond repair? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories. See you next time.